Welcome, listeners, to the Family Shadows podcast. It was midnight when I went downstairs to take out the trash, only to catch my mother-in-law sprinkling a mysterious white powder into my food. Pretending I hadn't seen a thing, I secretly had the meal forwarded to my husband for his late-night supper. At 3 a.m., I received a frantic call from a doctor. Rushing to the hospital, I arrived just in time to see my mother-in-law collapse at the sight of two lifeless bodies. It was 12:30 a.m. The hallway of the pre-war condo building in Chicago where I lived was drowned in an eerie, suffocating silence. The only sound was the wind howling through a cracked window at the end of the corridor, creating a mournful wail. I am Sarah, a clinical pharmacist. My daily life revolves around prescriptions, life and death dosages, and the pungent smell of antiseptics that seems permanently woven into the fabric of my white coat. Tonight, my stomach was growling fiercely because I had skipped dinner, so I hastily ordered a rich crab bisque from a late-night seafood spot via DoorDash. Little did I know, that bowl of soup would be the catalyst for a brutal, devastating tragedy in my family. As I carried the delivery bag to my door, reaching into my purse for my keys, my eyes instinctively glanced at the decorative mirror mounted above the hallway shoe cabinet. My husband had bought it, claiming he needed to check his attire before heading out to meet clients. Through the dim reflection, I saw the guest room door crack open. A figure crept out, moving with the stealthy, guilty demeanor of a thief. It was Eleanor, my mother-in-law. She was wearing a burgundy silk nightgown, clutching a small packet in her hand, her eyes darting toward the front door to ensure I hadn't returned yet. I held my breath, pressing myself into the dark alcove next to the cabinet, pretending to fumble for dropped keys on the floor so I could observe her. Eleanor approached the console table where I usually left my things. With trembling hands, she popped the lid off the steaming container of bisque that the delivery driver had just dropped off. She poured a fine white powder into the hot soup. She muttered venomous curses that, despite the distance, I could hear perfectly clearly in the dead of night. Eat it and die, you barren, useless woman. You poisonous weed taking up space where my true blood grandson belongs. She stirred the soup gently with a plastic spoon, clumsily wiped away a trace of powder on the rim with a napkin, and then crept back into her room. My heart felt like it was being crushed not out of fear, but from a wave of profound bitterness rising in my throat. I waited until her door clicked completely shut before standing up straight. Stepping inside the apartment, the aroma of the hot crab bisque hit my nose. But this time, it wasn't just savory and inviting. It was laced with a strange, distinct scent, with the sharp olfactory senses of a pharmacist who had handled chemicals for 10 years. I immediately recognized it. It wasn't rat poison or arsenic. It was the harsh, distinct, metallic odor of crushed, new-generation cephalosporin antibiotics. A chilling realization ran down my spine as I connected the dots. Just that afternoon, Eleanor had finalized a high-value life insurance policy on me. She was the primary beneficiary. She didn't use an illegal poison because she was terrified of a police investigation. Instead, she used prescription medication, something she ignorantly assumed would merely make me chronically ill, bedridden, or cause a miscarriage if I happened to be pregnant. I remembered the text message my husband, Richard, had sent me at 7 p.m. Honey, I have to work late. Closed-door meeting with the regional VP to finalize the Q4 project. I'll probably just crash at the office tonight. Don't wait up. But I knew exactly what his closed-door meeting actually meant. The iCloud location on the new iPhone I had bought him last month was blinking steadily at the Pinnacle, a luxury high-rise downtown, where he frequently took his clients. And I knew Richard's habits. Whenever he entertained or had a good time outside the marriage, he drank heavy liquor. He was a heavy drinker, always consuming massive amounts of alcohol to prove his masculinity. As a clinical pharmacist, I knew better than anyone what happens when cephalosporin interacts with high levels of alcohol in the human body. It triggers a severe disulfiram-like reaction. It blocks the metabolism of alcohol, causing a massive buildup of toxic acetaldehyde, leading to a catastrophic drop in blood pressure, cardiovascular collapse, and rapid death. My mother-in-law wanted to harm her daughter-in-law, but without realizing it, she was holding a knife to her own son's throat. I stood frozen in the cold kitchen, staring at the soup of love my mother-in-law had just prepared for me. Inside me, a violent war raged between the ethical conscience of a medical professional and the searing resentment of a betrayed wife. Finally, I pulled out my phone. My fingers glided across the cold screen, dialing the delivery driver who had just left. Hi. Could you please come back for a second? I'll tip you extra in cash. I need you to deliver this soup to a different address for me. After handing the bag back to the driver, I texted Richard. My tone was as sweet as always. You're working so hard. Your mom felt bad that you were working so late and worried you'd be hungry. She spent ages making this special soup to boost your energy and asked me to send it over. Make sure you eat it while it's hot to help sober you up. Don't let her down. Message sent. I sat down on the living room sofa, staring blankly into the dark void of the apartment. The shadows seemed to be accomplices to my silence. I didn't kill anyone. I was simply a dutiful wife, sending a late-night supper to my husband, just as my mother-in-law had intended. As for what was in the soup, and who put it there, the heavens have eyes. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The ticking of the wall clock sounded like the Grim Reaper's countdown. It was 3 a.m. The silence was so absolute, I could hear my own heavy breathing. Intertwined with the ticking were the memories of Eleanor's emotional abuse over the past 3 years. She constantly called me a barren hen, a toxic dead end that was single-handedly causing the extinction of the family lineage. She had forced me to drink countless dubious herbal concoctions that repeatedly left my body exhausted and depleted. I had endured it all, quietly accepting the abuse, believing I was failing in my duties as a wife. But her sheer malice tonight had crossed the ultimate boundary of human endurance. At exactly 3:05 a.m., my phone rang. The shrill ringtone ripped through the quiet night. The caller ID showed Metro General Hospital's emergency department. My heart skipped a beat, even though I was mentally prepared. When the moment actually arrived, I couldn't stop my hands from trembling. I answered. The voice of a frantic ER doctor echoed through the speaker. Sarah, you need to get to the hospital immediately. Your husband, Richard, was brought in. It's critical. He's in cardiac arrest. I dropped the phone onto the mattress, playing the role of a devastated wife receiving horrific news. But deep down, I knew the script was playing out perfectly. I threw on a windbreaker and sped through the empty city streets. The cold wind whipped against my face, forcing tears from my eyes. I didn't know if I was crying because of the wind or mourning the pathetic end of my marriage. When I arrived, the ER hallway was a chaotic scene of rushing footsteps and the overwhelming smell of antiseptics. That familiar, everyday smell suddenly felt more terrifying than ever. Eleanor had arrived before me. The hospital must have called the emergency contact listed on Richard's phone. She was wailing agonizingly, rolling on the cold, sterile tile floor. When she saw me, she lunged forward, trying to grab my hair to attack me, but hospital security held her back. She shrieked, "It's you. You killed my son. Why didn't you eat the soup? Why did Richard eat it?" The attending ER physician walked out, looking exhausted and deeply sympathetic. He shook his head. He looked at me with pity. We did everything we could. But the patient suffered severe disulfiram-like toxicity, complicated by an extremely high blood alcohol concentration. The reaction was too fast and caused irreversible cardiovascular collapse. We lost him at 3 a.m. Hearing that her son was dead, Eleanor's cries choked in her throat. Her eyes rolled back into her head. But that wasn't the biggest shock. The doctor hesitated for a moment before continuing. As for the young woman who was brought in with him, Chloe, because she was 3 months pregnant, her system was highly vulnerable. Combined with the fact that she also consumed the soup and was drinking wine, neither the mother nor the baby made it. We lost both of them. The words mother and baby struck the top of Eleanor's head like a lightning bolt, turning her into a statue. She knew exactly who Chloe was. Chloe was the mistress Eleanor had secretly encouraged Richard to see. The woman carrying the blood grandson Eleanor had been desperately waiting for to replace me. Eleanor stared blankly at the 2 stretchers being wheeled out of the trauma bay, covered in stark, chilling white sheets. One large, one small. Eleanor had personally poisoned the soup to kill me, aiming to clear the path for the mistress and the grandson to enter our family. But in a twist of cruel irony, that very soup of love had sent both her son and her precious unborn grandson straight to hell. Eleanor stumbled, clutching the left side of her chest. She mumbled incoherently before collapsing onto the floor, completely unconscious. I stood leaning against the wall, watching the chaotic scene unfold. Tears streamed down my face, perfectly executing the role of the grieving widow. But inside, I felt a strange, hollow emptiness. The air in the police interrogation room was thick with the smell of stale coffee and tension. I sat across from 2 detectives, my hands wrapping around a warm paper cup of water a female officer had given me. I tried to keep my shoulders from shivering, not from fear, but from the coldness radiating from the very depths of my soul. Eleanor had woken up in the hospital, and the moment she opened her eyes, her first words weren't a lament for her son, but a fierce, ironclad accusation aimed directly at me. She firmly told the police that I had poisoned the soup, claiming I was a cold-blooded murderer who wanted to kill my husband for his money. The older detective, a seasoned veteran of complex domestic cases, looked at me with piercing eyes. "Sarah, your mother-in-law stated that you were the one who received the delivery and brought it inside. She claims you two had marital issues over money and jealousy. Is it possible that drove you to this?" I looked up at him with red, swollen eyes. My voice choked with emotion, yet every word was deliberate. "Detective, it's true I received the food, but I am a clinical pharmacist. I understand the value of a human life, and I know exactly how chemicals work. If I wanted to harm my husband, I have hundreds of untraceable, sophisticated ways to do it. I wouldn't be stupid enough to use my own DoorDash account to order soup, poison it, and leave a digital paper trail sending it directly to him." I reached into my purse. My hands were shaking, but my movements were decisive. I opened the smart home app linked to the indoor Nest camera Richard had installed in our entryway. He had installed it under the guise of home security for when he traveled for work. But I knew the real reason: to monitor me, to see when I left, when I came home, and if I had anyone over. Ironically, the digital eye he used to imprison me had just become my ultimate talisman, saving me from his mother's deadly blade. I placed the phone on the table and slid it toward the detectives. "This is the footage recorded at 12:35 a.m. last night. Everything is in here." The crisp, high-definition video played on the screen. It clearly showed me bending down to find my keys. The exact moment my back was turned, the guest room door opened. Eleanor, in her burgundy nightgown, crept out. Her face, illuminated by the dim hallway light, looked sinister. She quickly popped the lid, poured the white powder in, and stirred it. The camera's audio caught her venomous muttering, "Eat it and die, you barren, useless woman. You don't deserve to be in this family." Watching this, the young female officer gasped in horror. The older detective furrowed his brow, his face hardening. I locked my phone screen, letting a tear roll down my cheek. My mother-in-law hated me because we couldn't conceive. She was always forcing me to drink weird herbal remedies. I felt bad that Richard was working so late, so I sent the food to him. Who could have known she would crush a lethal dose of antibiotics into it? I left the sentence hanging, leaving a vast, empty space for them to fill with their own conclusions about a mother's cruelty and a dutiful wife's innocence. Legally, my action of forwarding the food was seen as an act of spousal care. I didn't know the soup was poisoned, and I certainly didn't know my husband was drinking alcohol. I was completely exonerated. As I walked out of the interrogation room, I saw Eleanor sitting slumped in a holding chair, handcuffed, waiting to be transferred to Cook County Jail. When she saw me, she thrashed like a wounded animal. She tried to lunge at me, but was restrained by the deputies. She screamed incessantly, "It's you. You knew. You knew, and you didn't say anything. You let Richard eat it. You're a demon." I stopped, straightened my collar, and looked directly into her bloodshot, manic eyes. I leaned down and whispered into her ear, just quiet enough for only the two of us to hear, but cold enough to freeze her soul. "Mom, your poisoning skills are really something. With just one bowl of soup, you managed to wipe out the entire bloodline of your family." Eleanor's eyes bulged. She gasped for air, unable to form a word, and then slumped into the arms of the police officers, fainting once more. I turned and walked away. My posture was perfectly straight, but my heart was as cold as ash. I returned to my gaping, empty apartment as dawn began to break. The chill of the morning dew and an overwhelming sense of isolation enveloped me the moment the heavy wooden door clicked shut. This place used to be a home. It was where I arranged fresh flowers and cooked meals. Now, it was just the crime scene of a tragic domestic homicide, a place where family ties were murdered by greed and ignorance. I sat down on the leather sofa Richard loved so much, placing the plastic evidence bag containing his personal effects on the coffee table. Inside was his iPhone. The screen cracked in the corner, likely from when he collapsed in the apartment. The police had returned it to me after extracting the necessary data. Richard was an extremely cautious man. His phone always had a 6-digit passcode, and he never let me touch it. He claimed it was a matter of necessary privacy in marriage. But he never suspected that the wife he deemed naive and foolish remembered perfectly the date he got down on one knee to propose to me in a candlelit, high-end restaurant, the 18th of May 2020. The fateful day that chained my life to this tragedy. With trembling fingers, I typed 051820. The phone unlocked with a soft click. His lock screen wasn't our wedding photo, as he always bragged to his coworkers. It was an ultrasound of a 6-week-old fetus, circled in bright red. I let out a bitter, distorted laugh. I swiped past messaging apps filled with sickeningly sweet text to a contact pinned at the top as wifey #2. But the thing that truly made my blood run cold wasn't the physical betrayal. It was a file hidden deep in a password-protected notes app. The title was brief but chilling. Retirement Plan. Once again, the password was my birthday. The ultimate irony. He used the numbers tied to my life to lock away the plot for my murder. The note was drafted 3 months ago. It detailed a cold, calculated timeline. Step 1. Buy max payout accidental life insurance. Beneficiaries: mother and husband. Step 2. Exploit wife's severe mango allergy. Mix freeze-dried mango powder into her daily smoothies to trigger anaphylactic shock. With every line I read, my spine grew colder. The words were like sharp blades slicing through my skin. The man who had shared my bed for years was a cold-blooded killer hiding behind a white-collar, corporate facade. He had planned every detail meticulously, even noting execution date: any time after November 15th, when the insurance policy officially clears the contestability period for a 100% payout. He wanted me dead to collect a massive insurance payout. Then, he would legally marry his mistress and bring her and the baby into a life of luxury built on my grave. But man proposes, God disposes. His flawless plan was ruined by the impatience and ignorance of his own mother. Because Eleanor hated me so much and wanted to clear the path for her grandson sooner, she took matters into her own hands using antibiotics instead of mango powder. And in a cruel twist of fate, the victim was the precious son she wanted to protect. I dropped the phone. Disgust rose in my throat. Not fear of death, but pure revulsion at the rotten, putrid character hiding behind my husband's respectable exterior. It turned out that last night's soup wasn't just poetic justice for Eleanor. It was the rightful punishment for a man plotting to murder his wife. In the cold room, I burst into laughter. The sound was dry and sorrowful. I pitied my own fate, and I laughed at the agonizing, ironic twists of life. By the time the sun fully rose, pale morning light filtered through the blinds, illuminating dust motes floating in the air like lost souls. I hadn't slept or eaten. I just sat in front of my computer, continuing my excavation of my late husband's true life. With his phone unlocked, I easily accessed his banking and financial apps. The numbers dancing across the screen told a story of blatant fraud and deceit. To the world and to me, Richard projected the image of a successful man, a regional sales director making deep into the 6 figures. But the reality behind that facade was incredibly pathetic. His primary checking account had barely a few $1,000s, but his list of debts was as long as a CVS receipt. There were dozens of aggressive texts from collection agencies and shady online payday loan apps with predatory interest rates. Most shockingly, he had 3 maxed-out credit cards. His total unsecured debt was over $150,000. I realized with horror that for the past 2 years, the tailored suits he wore, the leased luxury car he drove, and the lavish dinners he hosted for clients, all of it was built on a towering mountain of debt. But what hurt the most wasn't his poverty. It was where the money was going. I pulled his transaction history for the past 2 years. Hundreds of wire transfers and Venmo payments had been sent like clockwork. The recipient was Chloe, his sweet little mistress who just followed him to the grave. There were small transactions of a few $100s with notes like dress money or spa day. But there were also massive wire transfers of $10,000 or $20,000 labeled house repairs for your folks or car down payment for your brother. It turned out that my salary, our joint savings that I trusted him to invest for our future, it had all been siphoned off to fund his mistress and her family. He took my blood, sweat, and tears, the sacrifices of a loyal wife, to nourish a second home. I found a $5,000 transfer from just last month. The memo read, "Happy birthday to my mother-in-law." The recipient was Chloe's mother. Meanwhile, for my own mother's birthday, he bought a $50 fruit basket and complained that his company was going through a tight quarter. Suffocating anger seized my chest. My hand gripped the computer mouse so hard my knuckles turned white. He didn't just betray my heart. He blatantly robbed me blind, turning me into a financial beast of burden to fund his and his mistress's whims. I quickly downloaded every bank statement, screenshotted the loan apps and illicit wire transfers, and printed everything out into a thick, undeniable file. In the world of finance, there is no room for lies or gaslighting. Follow the money, and you find the truth. Richard's funeral was held at Oak Ridge Funeral Home. I tried my best to organize everything perfectly, not out of lingering love, but to maintain my dignity and put on a final show for the public eye. Mournful organ music played softly. The scent of floral arrangements stung my eyes, which were already swollen from lack of sleep. A steady stream of guests arrived to pay their respects. Hollow, rehearsed condolences buzzed in my ears. Dressed in a sharp black suit, I stood by the casket, bowing my head and thanking each person with the face of an utterly devastated widow. It was a role I had to play flawlessly before the final curtain fell. But just as I predicted, the storm wasn't going to pass by my house quietly. Around 10 a.m., a loud, aggressive group of people barged into the funeral parlor lobby, shattering the solemn atmosphere. Leading the pack were a middle-aged couple, dressed somewhat casually, but carrying an incredibly hostile demeanor. Behind them were a few tough-looking younger men. It was Bob and Linda, Chloe's parents, along with her brother. They didn't come to offer condolences. They came to collect a blood debt. The moment Linda saw Richard's memorial photo, she began to shriek. Her wailing drowned out the soft funeral music. "Oh my God, my poor daughter died for nothing. You people owe us a life. You owe us my grandchild." She charged forward, clutching a large framed photo of Chloe smiling brightly. In a stunningly disrespectful move, she slammed Chloe's portrait right next to Richard's on the memorial table. The guests gasped in shock. Bob, the father, pointed a trembling, furious finger right at my face and yelled, "You're the wife, aren't you? Your husband was sleeping with my daughter, and he got her killed. A mother and a baby. Your family is responsible. You're his wife, you couldn't control your man, and now my daughter is dead. What are you going to do about it?" The crowd of mourners began to whisper. Curious, judgmental eyes pierced me like poisoned needles. I stood there, watching this mob turn my husband's funeral into a trashy reality TV show. I felt no fear, only intense nausea at the sheer audacity of human greed. They knew full well their daughter was a homewrecker who helped destroy another woman's marriage. But instead of feeling shame, they were using her corpse to extort me for a payout. I signaled the funeral home security to stand down and let them finish their pathetic performance. Seeing me stay silent, Linda felt emboldened. She threw herself onto the carpeted floor, thrashing dramatically. "Look at this, everyone. The rich wife thinks she can just crush us. Her husband is dead, and she thinks she's going to swallow his whole estate and leave us with nothing. We want $500,000. We demand $500,000 for emotional distress and to support us in our old age, or we will never let this go." The number $500,000 fell so easily from the mouths of these greedy vultures. It made me sneer internally. So, that was the price tag they put on their daughter and grandchild's lives. Cash out, and all is forgiven. I looked around at the neighbors and coworkers eyeing me with suspicion. They were starting to buy into this poor victim's oppressed by the wealthy wife narrative. I looked at Bob's red, greedy face, then turned and gave a slight nod to my private attorney, who had been standing quietly in the corner. My lawyer stepped forward, holding the thick file folder I had prepared. He adjusted his glasses and spoke in a deep, authoritative voice that resonated through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we discuss any compensation, allow me to disclose the official financial estate of the deceased." He opened the folder. He read off the numbers clearly, each one driving a nail into the coffin of Richard's glamorous, hollow life. According to bank records and credit reports, Richard did not own any real estate. The car he drove was heavily financed. Currently, Richard has $100,000 in maxed-out credit card debt and $50,000 in unsecured, high-interest personal loans. The entire room gasped. The whispers turned into a loud buzz of shock. Nobody could believe their ears. Chloe's parents froze. Their mouths hung open, unable to speak. Their aggressive, flushed faces instantly drained to an ashen gray. They thought they had struck gold, only to realize they had sprinted headfirst into a bottomless pit of debt. I stepped closer to them, my eyes locking onto the trembling woman on the floor. "He's not finished. My lawyer has one more important item to share with you." The lawyer turned the page, his voice growing sharper. "During the course of the marriage, Richard illicitly wired a total of $150,000 to Chloe and her immediate family members. Under Illinois state law, this is classified as marital asset dissipation, the unauthorized spending of joint marital funds on a paramour. My client, Sarah, has the legal right to file a civil suit against Chloe's estate and her beneficiaries to claw back every single cent. I looked at Bob. The man who had just demanded $500,000 was now shaking so violently he had to hold onto the memorial table to stay upright. I enunciated every word slowly. Did you hear that? Richard wasn't just broke. He was drowning in debt. The money he used to fix your roof, the down payment for your son's truck, all of it was my blood, sweat, and tears. Now he's dead, but the debt remains. Not only do I not owe you a single dime, but your family currently owes me $150,000. Silence blanketed the room. The only sounds were the hum of the air conditioner and the terrified, ragged breathing of the greedy extortionists who had just had their masks ripped off. The reality of the massive debt and the impending lawsuit caused Linda's knees to buckle. She stammered incoherently, her eyes darting frantically for an exit. Bob tried to salvage whatever shred of pride he had left. He pointed at me, but his trembling finger betrayed his terror. You stopped threatening us. My daughter is dead. Have some respect for the dead. Are you really going to push us to the brink? I looked at him. A faint, mocking smile touched my lips, but my eyes were as cold as glacial ice. Pushing you? You brought your daughter's photo here to extort me. You tried to squeeze cash out of a corpse. I pulled a drafted legal document from my purse, my voice unnervingly calm. This is a notice of intent to sue. Tomorrow morning, the process server will be at your front door in your hometown. The $150,000, plus legal interest, will be pursued to the fullest extent of the law, even if it means putting a lien on the house you're currently living in. Hearing that she might lose her house, Linda began to sob hysterically. She crawled toward me, trying to grab my ankles to beg, but I stepped back, avoiding her filthy touch. I looked down at her, delivering the bitter words I had been holding back. When your daughter chose to be a homewrecker, she should have known that every gift from fate comes with a price tag. Sometimes the price is money. Sometimes it's your life. I signaled to the security team on standby. They immediately moved in, firmly escorting Chloe's family out of the funeral parlor. Bob tried to resist, but under the disgusted glares of the attendees and the strict handling by security, he lowered his head and dragged his sobbing wife out the door. It was a pathetic sight, like thieves caught red-handed, humiliating, and shameful. Smartphones flashed around the room as attendees recorded the moment the mistress's family was thrown out of the legal wife's funeral service. I knew that by tomorrow, this video would be everywhere on social media. The next morning, before the funeral flowers even had time to wilt, I shed my mourning attire. I put on a sharp, tailored blazer and marched into the corporate headquarters where Richard used to work. I wasn't there to cry, beg for widow's benefits, or ask for a hardship stipend. I was there to execute the next phase of cleaning up the wreckage of my marriage. Sitting across from the HR director and the head of corporate legal in a freezing conference room, I placed a USB drive on the table. It contained all the cloned data from Richard's phone and laptop. My eyes were unwavering, my voice steady. I am not here today as a grieving widow. I am here as a citizen reporting corporate fraud. This is the evidence that my husband was embezzling and taking kickbacks from this company. The HR director frowned. He plugged the drive into his laptop. Files, secret chat logs, and fake vendor invoices filled the large projector screen. Richard had abused his position as sales director to inflate vendor costs and take kickbacks from suppliers. And the most painful part? His primary accomplice inside the company was Chloe, who worked in the planning department. The flirty, sickening texts interwoven with calculated discussions on how to split dirty money made the executives in the room shake their heads in disgust. I pointed to a detailed Excel spreadsheet. The total estimated loss to the company is around $80,000. The majority of this was funneled into personal accounts held by Chloe and her family. I looked the HR director dead in the eye. Even though my husband is dead, I refuse to let my name be tainted by this dirty money. I strongly advise the company to investigate, terminate both of them posthumously with cause, and freeze all unpaid bonuses and final paychecks to recover the stolen funds. The room fell silent, save for the clicking of the legal secretary's keyboard taking minutes. For a major corporation, reputation and compliance are paramount. They couldn't ignore fraud, regardless of whether the perpetrators were dead. The meeting ended exactly as I had orchestrated. The company formally terminated Richard and Chloe posthumously, revoking all death benefits, severance, and Q4 bonuses. Furthermore, the legal department confirmed they would file a claim against Chloe's estate, meaning her parents to recover the embezzled funds she helped steal. Stepping out of the glass skyscraper, I took a deep breath of the dusty Chicago air. A strange sense of relief fluttered in my chest. I had weaponized the rules of corporate America to punish the greedy, using the company to deliver a fatal blow to Chloe's family. Now, they wouldn't just lose their daughter and face my lawsuit. They were buried under insurmountable corporate debt. As I arrived at the lobby of my condo building, the front desk concierge called my cell. He apologetically informed me that a large group of people claiming to be my husband's relatives were causing a scene outside my unit. I smiled bitterly, hung up, and stepped into the elevator. Watching the floor numbers tick up to 15, my heart felt heavy with exhaustion. The news of Richard's death and the rumor that I was secretly rich must have traveled to his rural hometown at lightning speed. It had awakened the greed of relatives who hadn't bothered to call us in years. Stepping off the elevator, I saw Uncle Arthur, Richard's father's brother, along with several aunts and cousins crowding my door. They had suitcases and duffel bags, looking as if they planned to move in permanently. Seeing me, Uncle Arthur put his hands on his hips, his protruding belly bounced with his heavy breaths, his booming voice echoing down the hall. Ah, the precious daughter-in-law finally graces us with her presence. Open the door. Hurry up. We are here to take over the property. Richard is dead, which means this house belongs to the family. We can't let an outsider like you steal it. The aunts behind him chimed in, their voices shrill and petty. That's right. We heard you're planning to sell the condo. My nephew bought this place with his own blood and sweat. You have no right to sell it. It stays in the family for his memorial. I leaned against the hallway wall, crossing my arms, watching the circus in front of me. They were like vultures, smelling a fresh carcass. Calmly, I pulled the property deed from my bag and held it up, keeping a safe distance. Look closely, everyone. I bought this condo entirely in cash, 2 years before Richard and I even got married. The deed has only one name on it, Sarah. It is my separate, premarital property. It is not a marital asset, and it is certainly not part of any estate for you to scavenge. Uncle Arthur's face turned beet red. He stammered, trying to argue logic. Well, you got married, so what's yours is his. Richard put so much work into this place. Don't try to pull a fast one on us. I laughed, stepping closer to the smart lock keypad. Richard put work into it? You mean he contributed with his maxed-out credit cards or the money he gave to his mistress? While we're on the subject, let me clarify something for you. Under probate law, whoever claims the estate inherits the debts as well. I unlocked the door, stepping aside to reveal the dark, empty apartment. Richard owes banks and predatory lenders over $150,000. If you want to claim your rights as his family, if you want to inherit his estate, be my guest. Step right in. I will happily transfer all his debt collection notices to you so you can pay them off. The relatives looked at me in disbelief when I mentioned the massive debt, but greed made them stubborn. Uncle Arthur spat a sunflower seed shell directly onto the polished hardwood floor. I cleaned every single day. His tone was defiant. Don't try to scare us with talk of debt. Where's the proof? Even if he had debt, the house is still his asset. We're staying right here. Let's see what you can do about it. He waved his hand, and the aunts marched in, plopping down onto the sofa, putting their dirty shoes on the coffee table as if it were their own front porch back in Illinois. I looked at the sunflower seed shells on the floor. I looked at the dirty boots staining my expensive wool rug. My last ounce of patience evaporated. I didn't say another word. I quietly pulled out my phone and played back the voice memo I had just recorded. Uncle Arthur's aggressive threats and the sound of them barging in played clearly in the quiet room. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. It wasn't the rude pounding of greedy relatives. It was the sharp, authoritative knock of law enforcement. I opened the door. 2 uniformed Chicago police officers stepped in, their stern eyes scanning the chaotic group in my living room. I had called them the moment I saw the crowd on the lobby security feed on my phone, because I knew arguing with irrational, greedy people was the most useless endeavor on earth. I pointed at Uncle Arthur and spoke calmly to the officers. Officers, this is my private residence. The deed is solely in my name. This group of people forced their way in. They are causing a disturbance, threatening me, and trespassing. I have asked them to leave, but they refuse and are attempting to unlawfully occupy my property. Seeing the cops, Uncle Arthur's face lost all its color. His previous bravado vanished. He stammered, Wait. Officers, there's a misunderstanding. We are the uncle and aunts of her late husband. We just came to visit our nephew's home." The older officer spoke with a hard edge. "A visit requires the homeowner's consent. The homeowner has asked you to leave. Remaining here constitutes criminal trespassing. I need to see everyone's ID right now, and if you don't vacate immediately, you're all coming down to the precinct." My lawyer, who had arrived right behind the police, delivered the final, lethal blow. Furthermore, let me be legally precise. Under probate law, heirs are responsible for settling the deceased's obligations out of the estate. If you are formally claiming to be Richard's heirs to seize this property, which legally belongs entirely to Sarah, you must first accept the responsibility of his $150,000 debt. The lawyer pulled out a massive stack of credit card bills and loan defaults, slapping it loudly onto the glass coffee table. "Whoever wants to claim his inheritance, please sign this assumption of debt form first." Hearing the word debt and the number $150,000, the aunts jumped up as if they had been burned. They grabbed their purses and slid their shoes back on. "Oh, Lord, we don't know anything about this. You handle your own family drama. We have to go catch the last Greyhound back home." Uncle Arthur looked at the stack of bills, then at the police officers. Sweat poured down his forehead. He gave a sickly, forced laugh. Well, I was just worried Sarah would be lonely living by herself. Nobody wants your money." The group of people who had been acting like feral wolves just minutes prior now scurried out the door with their tails between their legs, cramming into the elevator without daring to look back. The door closed, returning the apartment to its usual silence, but the air still reeked of sweat and human greed. I thanked the officers and my lawyer, then knelt on the floor, picking up the sunflower seed shells one by one and throwing them in the trash. I didn't cry, but my heart ached. It ached to see how cold blood ties could be. It ached to realize that when money speaks, family means absolutely nothing. After the greedy relatives fled, I thought I would finally have a moment of peace to breathe. But an even larger storm was brewing in the virtual world. My phone vibrated endlessly. It wasn't condolence messages. It was a barrage of social media tags and notifications. A flood of vicious, hateful comments poured onto my personal pages. A friend texted me a link to a live stream with a panicked message. "Sarah, look at this right now. That girl's family is going crazy online. They're saying you're a monster." With trembling hands, I clicked the link. Filling my screen was Linda's swollen, tear-streaked face. She was sitting in a rundown motel room. Behind her was Chloe's memorial photo. Beside her was her husband, Bob, looking utterly miserable. She was wailing into the camera, playing the ultimate tragedy card. "Everyone, please help our family. My daughter was murdered. Yes, she was foolish to love a married man. I won't defend that. But she didn't deserve to die. She didn't deserve to have a woman poison both her and her unborn baby." She wiped her tears, but her eyes secretly darted to the viewer count, which was skyrocketing. Then, she launched into a blatant, fabricated lie. That wife knew the soup was poisoned, but she didn't eat it. She deliberately sent it to my daughter and her husband. She used another person's knife to commit murder. She wanted to rip them out by the roots so she could keep her status as the rich, legal wife. "Oh God, is there any justice in this world?" Bob chimed in, his voice trembling in feigned fear of the elite. "Her family is so rich, so powerful. We are just poor, working-class people. Nobody will listen to us. Now she's even threatening to sue us, demanding we pay back the gifts her husband gave our daughter. She's backing us into a corner, forcing us to sell our home." These venomous lies, molded through crocodile tears, combined with the internet's natural instinct to side with the underdog, instantly turned me into an evil, wicked witch in the eyes of the public. In the comments section, thousands of people who knew nothing of the truth were throwing digital stones. The words were as sharp as knives. "Women can be so evil. The mistress was wrong, but she was still human. Why kill the baby too? Rich and evil. Karma will get her. Cancel this murderous wife. Justice for the deceased." I read through the comments, a cold chill running down my spine. Not because I was afraid of the internet mob, but because I was horrified by how easily manipulated people were. They didn't care about facts. They only cared about who was crying the loudest. They were ready to use their keyboards to trample on the reputation of someone they had never even met. I turned off the screen and looked out the window. The city lights were dazzling, but my heart was incredibly dark. In this empty apartment, I was entirely alone, facing a world that had turned its back on me. My in-laws were treacherous. My husband had betrayed me. And now, society wanted to drown me in fabricated lies. But they were wrong. The Sarah of the past might have cried, begged for understanding, and collapsed under the weight of public opinion. But the Sarah of today had swallowed enough pain to become bulletproof. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative. I wasn't going to let those extortionists play the victim on top of my trauma. I sat quietly at my desk. The blue light from the monitor reflected off my expressionless face, a stark contrast to the frantic, boiling rage on the internet. Linda's live stream had been going on for over an hour. The live viewer count had surpassed 50,000, a terrifying number capable of ruining anyone's life. Friends and colleagues were calling and texting, urging me to make a public statement, turn off my comments, do something to stop the bleeding. I sent a single, short reply to all of them. Just wait. The best part is yet to come. I didn't turn off comments. I didn't delete a single hateful message. I let the mob's outrage climb to its absolute peak. In this post-truth era, they say silence is golden. But for me, in this moment, silence was the sharpened blade I was preparing for a lethal counterattack. I knew that when a mob's emotions are pushed to the absolute limit, they lose all logical reasoning. And that is exactly when the truth, once exposed, has the most devastating, explosive impact. I took a sip of cold coffee. The bitter taste washed over my tongue, making my mind sharper than ever. I picked up my phone and dialed Mark, a highly respected investigative crime journalist I had contacted earlier. Mark, the temperature is just right. Fire the first shot, I said, my voice as calm as if discussing the weather. Remember, make the headline shocking, but keep the content absolutely clinical. Only facts, no emotional spin. On the other end, Mark chuckled, the excitement of a journalist about to drop an exclusive scoop evident in his voice. Don't worry, Sarah. Everything is queued up. At 8 p.m. sharp, the whole internet is going to do a 180. At exactly 8 p.m., the exclusive article dropped with the headline, "The Shocking Truth Behind the Fatal Midnight Delivery. Who was the real killer?" It immediately skyrocketed to the front page of major news aggregators. I pasted the link directly into the comments of Linda's live stream with a short caption, "The truth is here. Watch before you judge." Simultaneously, massive true crime and legal pages on social media uploaded the video extracted from my indoor Nest camera, the ace I had been holding up my sleeve. The internet exploded. But this time, the winds changed direction completely. The unedited, high-definition video stripped away all the lies. Viewers watched in horror as Eleanor sneaked out in the dead of night, holding the white powder, dumping it into the soup with a face twisted in pure, murderous malice. The audio of her muttering, "Eat it and die, you barren, useless woman," was clearly subtitled. Everyone watching shuddered in terror. There is no explanation more authentic than raw video. There is no justification that can beat the naked truth unfolding before millions of eyes. Public opinion whipped around 180 degrees. The people who had been cursing me just moments ago turned their fury onto Linda's livestream. Oh my God. The mother-in-law tried to murder her daughter-in-law, but accidentally killed her own son. Pure evil. That old lady is a demon, not a human. Poor wife. Cheated on by her husband and almost poisoned by his mom. And we were blaming her. Apologies flooded my inbox. Vicious attacks were redirected at Eleanor and Chloe's family, completely drowning out Linda's fake tears. On the screen, Linda was still screaming, trying to speak over the tidal wave of backlash, endlessly repeating that her daughter was framed. I shook my head in disgust. My finger pressed. Enter one more time, releasing the second wave of evidence I had prepared. This was the final nail in the coffin of their reputation. This time, it wasn't a video. It was a massive dump of screenshots from Richard's phone, specifically the chilling note titled, "Retirement Plan." The cold, calculating words appeared before thousands of viewers. No 15. Accidental life insurance kicks in. Dex/, mix mango powder into smoothie. Wife severely allergic. Have fake EpiPen ready. Alongside the note were the text messages between Richard and Chloe. The blatant cruelty made readers sick to their stomachs. Chloe's text. "Hurry up. That bitch is living too long." I don't want our baby born without its father. When do we get the insurance money? Richard's reply, don't worry. I'm calculating the dosage. As long as she goes into anaphylactic shock, it looks like an accident. The assets and the payout will be ours. We'll move to Australia. The image of the naive, manipulated young girl that her parents had carefully constructed shattered into a million pieces. In its place stood the true portrait of a cold-blooded accomplice to conspiracy to commit murder. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Chloe's family didn't dare step out of their motel room, terrified of the glaring eyes and public shaming. But it didn't stop there. The civil court had processed my lawsuit and granted an emergency injunction, freezing all of Bob and Linda's bank accounts. The $150,000 Richard had wired them was now evidence of receiving illicit marital assets. They couldn't withdraw a single cent to survive or flee. Simultaneously, the landlord of their short-term rental in the city kicked them out immediately, refusing to be associated with such notorious, despised people. I sat in my parked car across the street, watching Bob and Linda dragging their cheap suitcases being physically thrown onto the sidewalk by the landlord. Linda sat on the concrete, sobbing loudly, but this time, nobody stopped to help. Pedestrians recognized them from the viral videos, giving them looks of utter disgust before hurrying past. Bob, the man who had aggressively demanded $500,000 at the funeral, was now shriveled and powerless, watching his wife cry without a clue what to do. They tried calling relatives back in their hometown, but news travels fast. Their calls were either declined or went to voicemail. No money, no home, shunned by society. They were truly experiencing the absolute isolation of being cast out in a cold, unforgiving city. I watched them, remembering how Eleanor had abused me, remembering Chloe's texts wishing for my death. A wave of sorrow for the human condition washed over me. Their daughter died because of greed, and now they were socially dying because of their own greed. The price for enabling evil, for living lavishly on the blood and sweat of others, was steeper and more brutal than any legal sentence. I signaled my driver to pull away. I didn't want to watch the tragedy anymore. Their punishment was already enough. I wasn't a saint to forgive those who wanted me dead, but I wasn't a demon to gloat over the extreme suffering of others. I was just a woman trying to sweep up the shattered pieces of my life and demand justice for myself. A week after the funeral, my lawyer brought troubling news from the county jail, instantly dropping the temperature in my living room. He informed me that Eleanor was showing signs of severe psychological distress. She was repeatedly banging her head against the cell walls, chewing on bars of soap, and having conversations with thin air. Her defense attorney, a cunning veteran of the criminal courts, had quickly seized the opportunity to file a motion for a psychiatric evaluation. He was attempting to build a medical history to prove Eleanor suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, arguing she committed the act while lacking the mental capacity to understand her actions. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. Are you kidding me? Insanity? A woman who knew exactly which antibiotics to buy, knew how to crush them, waited until my back was turned, and wiped away the evidence is insane. My lawyer sighed, his voice grave. It's a loophole they are trying to exploit. If the evaluation concludes she meets the legal standard for NGRI, not guilty, by reason of insanity, she won't go to state prison. She'll be remanded to a state psychiatric facility. And after a few years, if she's deemed stable, she could be released back into society. Hearing this, a fire roared in my chest. The injustice was suffocating. I stood up and paced the room. She murdered her own son, indirectly murdered his mistress, and killed an unborn child. Most importantly, she actively premeditated my murder. A horrific crime driven by base motives and meticulous calculation. How could it be whitewashed by a single piece of paper declaring her insane? I remembered the sharp, lucid look in her eyes on the camera footage. I remembered the venom in her curses. That was the cruelty of a perfectly sane person blinded by greed and selfishness, not a disease. If she got away with this, where was the justice? And how could the dead rest in peace while the killer lived out her days comfortably? I turned to my lawyer, my eyes blazing. I will not accept that. We have to do something to stop this pathetic act. She can play crazy to fool the doctors, but she can't erase her true motive. That night, I stayed awake, scouring my memories, desperately searching for any clue that could prove Eleanor was entirely sane and acting with purpose. Her motive was to kill me so Richard could marry Chloe, allowing the blood grandson to officially enter the family line. It was a very grounded, traditional motive rooted in patriarchal obsession and greed. The defense was arguing she had a paranoid delusion that I was harming her family, hence she acted in self-defense. A blatant lie. Suddenly, a memory from 3 years ago flashed in my mind like lightning in the dark. It was the time Richard and I visited a renowned fertility clinic in the city. Richard had gone into the doctor's office alone to hear the results. When he came out, he told me he was perfectly healthy. The problem, he said, was my poor hormonal balance. From that day on, I lived in a state of guilt, enduring my mother-in-law's insults and drinking the awful herbal tea she brought me. But with my clinical intuition, I vaguely recalled Richard's nervous, evasive demeanor that day, and how he had quickly hidden the lab results in his briefcase. What if the truth wasn't what he told me? What if Richard was the one with the problem? Early the next morning, I drove to Metro General Hospital, where we had been tested, to find Dr. Miller, the head of urology and an old friend of my late father. After explaining the situation, showing the death certificate, and providing my marriage license, I begged him to pull Richard's old medical file. Dr. Miller looked at me with pity. He sighed heavily, typing a few commands into his computer. The screen populated with a chart from 3 years ago, filled with cold, clinical terminology. He pushed his glasses up his nose, his voice filled with sorrow. Sarah, I always assumed Richard eventually told you. He suffered from non-obstructive azoospermia. He had 0 sperm count due to a chromosomal microdeletion. His chances of conceiving a child naturally were absolute 0. I froze. My hands trembled as I took the printed lab results from him. The words danced mockingly before my eyes. I had been lied to, cruelly and completely. I had tortured myself, endured unspeakable humiliation, for a flaw that wasn't mine. But more importantly, this truth meant the fetus in Chloe's womb, the precious blood grandson Eleanor had committed murder to protect. The baby Richard had been pampering was absolutely not Richard's biological child. Dr. Miller looked at me kindly. He poured a cup of warm water and slid it toward me. His voice dropped. That day, when I handed him the results, Richard begged me not to tell you. He said his pride as a man wouldn't allow him to admit he was sterile. He promised he would look into treatments or anonymous donors quietly. I let out a bitter laugh, a distorted smile forming on my meticulously made-up face. And his way of treatment was blaming his wife, letting his mother abuse me day and night, calling me a barren hen, a useless woman making his family go extinct. I remembered the endless nights crying myself to sleep, the bitter, sludgy teas Eleanor forced down my throat until I vomited. She even gossiped to our neighbors that I was defective, letting the whole community judge me. It turned out, it was all a cruel play, designed to cover up Richard's inadequacy. He used my reputation and my mental health as a meat shield for his fragile ego. I took a deep breath, suppressing the sob rising in my chest, and looked at Dr. Miller. I don't blame you, Dr. Miller. You were bound by HIPAA and trying to protect a patient. But I need your help one last time to bring the truth to light, so that the people who caused this nightmare face true justice. I requested a certified copy of the medical records. I also asked Dr. Miller to initiate a protocol to retrieve the tissue sample Richard had cryopreserved at the clinic's sperm bank 3 years prior, just in case he ever found a miracle cure. Luckily, the clinic still held the sample under his 5-year storage contract. Simultaneously, my lawyer coordinated with the medical examiner's office to obtain a DNA sample from the deceased fetus. These 2 samples were the keys to unlocking the gates of hell for Eleanor, turning her ultimate hope into eternal despair. Walking out of the hospital with a thick file, the glaring midday sun didn't warm me, it only blinded me. I sat in my car, watching the bustling city, wondering how many other women were living in a web of lies just like I was. Richard was dead. Chloe was dead. But the truth about Richard's child was alive. It was the ultimate proof of the double betrayal Richard suffered. He betrayed me for his mistress, but his mistress had played him for a fool, tricking him into raising another man's child. And my ignorant mother-in-law, in her blind quest to protect that fake bloodline, had murdered her only biological son. I drove home. My heart was eerily calm, like the ocean before a massive hurricane flat, but harboring destructive power. I placed the medical file on the table next to Richard's memorial photo. I lit a candle, staring at his smug, handsome face in the picture. You hit it well, Richard. But you forgot that paper can't wrap up a fire. You wanted an heir so badly you were willing to raise another man's bastard, or maybe she fooled you too. Whatever it is, tomorrow, your mother is going to learn the truth. Consider it my final parting gift to her. The candle flame flickered, casting bizarre, dancing shadows on the wall, as if Richard's soul was writhing in agony as his darkest secret was dragged into the light. The day of the trial arrived. The Chicago sky was heavy and gray, as if it wanted to swallow the city whole. The suffocating air signaled a massive storm. I arrived at the Cook County Courthouse early, taking a seat in the front row reserved for the victim's family. My tailored black suit hugged my thin frame, making me look even more isolated and stoic. Across the aisle, Eleanor's defense attorney was organizing his papers. His face showed the arrogant confidence of a man who believed he had the insanity plea in the bag. The heavy courtroom doors swung open. Two bailiffs escorted Eleanor in. The clinking of her ankle chains sent a chill through the room. It had only been a few months, but she was so deteriorated I almost didn't recognize her. Her once dyed black hair was stark white and matted like a bird's nest. Her eyes were glazed, darting around the room like a lost child. She wore an oversized orange jumpsuit, constantly muttering nonsense, occasionally giggling, then bursting into tears. "Richard, eat your soup, baby. Mom made it for you. Where is my grandson?" Her acting was so good that if I hadn't known the truth, I might have felt pity for an old woman driven mad by grief. Her lawyer stood up, his voice booming across the courtroom. "Your Honor, the defendant, Eleanor, has a documented history of severe psychological distress, exacerbated by the catastrophic shock of losing her son. This has culminated in severe paranoid schizophrenia. She committed the act while completely detached from reality, suffering from delusions that her daughter-in-law was poisoning her, leading her to act in perceived self-defense. She lacks the mental capacity to be held criminally responsible. We request the court accept the NGRI plea and remand her to a psychiatric facility for mandatory treatment." He submitted a stack of psychiatric evaluations. Clinical jargon and numbers were thrown out like a smokescreen to blind the jury. I sat as still as a statue, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my nails digging into my skin to maintain composure. I watched Eleanor acting out her madness at the defense table. She pretended not to recognize me, but occasionally, her eyes would shoot a sharp, venomous glare in my direction. The glare of an old wolf waiting for its moment. She really thought she could play crazy, beat the murder charge, and live out her days comfortably in a hospital instead of a cold prison cell. The judge furrowed his brow, reviewing the documents. The courtroom was incredibly tense. Muted whispers echoed through the gallery. Most people were highly skeptical of her conveniently timed insanity, but faced with legal medical documents, they felt the frustration of an imperfect justice system. My lawyer leaned in and whispered, "They prepared well. If we don't drop the hammer now, the judge might order another independent evaluation, and this trial will drag on for years." I nodded slightly, my eyes fixed firmly on the prosecutor's podium. At that moment, the assistant state's attorney, a sharp, middle-aged man with piercing eyes, stood up slowly, adjusted his tie, and broke the suffocating tension with a booming, authoritative voice. "Your Honor, the state vehemently rejects the defense's assertion that the defendant lacked mental capacity. We have conclusive evidence proving that the defendant's actions were premeditated, highly calculated, and driven by a highly specific, grounded motive, not delusion." The prosecutor stepped away from the podium, pacing slowly in front of the jury box. His eyes drilled into Eleanor, who was staring at the floor, faking her stupor. The defense claims the defendant was delusional, yet the security footage and witness testimony prove she was highly lucid when purchasing the medication, crushing it, waiting for the victim's back to be turned, and destroying the evidence. But most importantly, the motive. The defendant stated repeatedly to neighbors that she wanted to get rid of her daughter-in-law to make room for her blood grandson. Let me ask the court, where did the concept of this grandson come from, if she was supposedly suffering from disconnected delusions? Eleanor tensed slightly, her hand, which had been crumpling the fabric of her jumpsuit, froze for a fraction of a second. The prosecutor turned back to the judge, enunciating every word. The defendant's motive was born of greed and a toxic, archaic obsession with patriarchal lineage. She believed her son's mistress was pregnant with a boy, the heir to the family name, and she murdered her daughter-in-law to clear the path. That is a very grounded, very real-world calculation. It is not the hallucination of a madwoman. And to prove just how violently real her calculation was, the state would like to introduce a new piece of evidence. A medical fact that alters the entire foundation of this case. He signaled the court clerk to project a document onto the large monitors. It was Richard's medical file that I had procured, alongside the official DNA forensics report delivered by the state lab just that morning. The tension in the room skyrocketed. Every eye was glued to the screens, eagerly waiting for the prosecutor's bombshell. I sat in the gallery, my heart pounding not out of anxiety, but in anticipation of the moment Eleanor's mask would be ripped off. She was still humming a lullaby, pretending to be crazy, but I could see cold sweat beading on her forehead. The instincts of a criminal were warning her that doom was approaching. The prosecutor pointed at the screen, his voice ringing out like the bell of judgment. Your Honor, the defendant has continuously used the excuse of protecting the family bloodline to justify her actions, dressing up murder as maternal devotion. But the cruel irony is that the so-called bloodline she committed double homicide to protect was nothing but an illusion. Because the victim, her son, Richard, was medically incapable of fathering a child. The courtroom erupted. Gasps and loud whispers bounced off the wood-paneled walls. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Eleanor stopped humming instantly. Her head snapped up, staring at the prosecutor. Her eyes were no longer clouded and vacant. They were filled with sheer, unadulterated horror. On the massive screen, the DNA paternity report was magnified. The black text on the white paper looked like poison arrows. The final conclusion was highlighted in bright red. DNA analysis indicates that the fetal tissue, child of Chloe, shares no paternal genetic markers with the biological sample of Richard. The probability of paternity is 0%. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence at the brutal, naked truth. It was so quiet you could hear the heavy breathing of the jury. Eleanor sat paralyzed, her eyes rolling back, her mouth hanging open in voiceless shock. Her fake insanity had vanished completely, replaced by the catastrophic collapse of a human being whose entire core belief system had just been atomized. She did all of this to protect her grandson, the heir to the family name. But that baby was just some random man's child. The product of Chloe's infidelity. Her son wasn't just sterile. He was a cuckold, tricked into raising a bastard. And Eleanor, the blindly devoted mother, had acted as the executioner, killing her own flesh and blood for nothing. I stood up from the gallery, looking directly at Eleanor. My voice was calm, but sliced through the air like a scalpel. Take a good look, Mom. That is the truth your son hid from you for 3 years. He knew he was sterile, but his ego wouldn't let him admit it. He knew that baby wasn't his, but he accepted it to secure your life insurance payout and my assets. You thought you were so smart. You thought you were fighting for your family, but you were just a pawn on their chessboard. You murdered your only son for a child that didn't share a single drop of your blood. My words hit her like a bucket of ice water, snapping her out of her stupor. No, no, that's a lie. You're lying to me, Eleanor shrieked. A blood-curdling, soul-tearing scream echoed through the courtroom. She thrashed against her lawyers, trying to lunge at the screen to rip the DNA report apart. Richard told me it was his. He showed me the ultrasound. My grandson. My blood. Oh, God. She slammed her head violently against the heavy oak defense table. Blood poured down her forehead, mixing with her tears and snot, creating a horrifying, tragic mask. This time, she wasn't acting. This madness was real. This agony was real. It was born from the deepest depths of regret and the most devastating disillusionment a mother could ever experience. She stood frozen in the center of the court, staring at the DNA results, babbling incoherent sounds. Her entire life had been driven by the vain glory of the family name, the desperation for a male heir, only to realize at the very end that she had murdered her only son over a spectacular, humiliating lie. I looked into her eyes, which were rapidly clouding over with genuine, incurable despair. I spoke clearly into the silent room. I told you, Mom. Richard knew he was sterile. He just needed the baby as an excuse to drain your retirement funds and my life insurance. You killed him for a stranger's baby. Was your sacrifice worth it? That final question acted as the blade that severed the last fragile thread of sanity in Eleanor's brain. Her fake insanity morphed into true, irreversible madness. She let out a guttural howl, like an animal trapped in a burning cage. The scream was so saturated with ultimate remorse and agonizing pain that everyone in the room shuddered. She lunged forward, smashing her head into the wooden barricade again. Blood sprayed, dyeing her white hair red. She screamed her son's name into the void. Richard, I killed you. Oh God, I'm so stupid. Where's my baby? Give me back my son." Bailiffs rushed in to subdue her, but the strength of pure despair made her thrash wildly. Her hair flew everywhere, blood and tears streaming down her face, a picture of utter, pathetic tragedy. Her defense attorney stood frozen, his files scattered on the floor. He knew the case was lost. Not lost because of legal arguments, but lost to the cruel, poetic irony of fate. After the chaos subsided, and Eleanor was sedated and dragged back to the defendant's chair, staring blankly into the void, the trial resumed. The judge's demeanor was sterner than ever. The nature of the case had shifted from a domestic tragedy to a horrifying cautionary tale of greed and malice. The presiding judge, a distinguished woman in her 50s with a stern but wise face, began to read the verdict. Her voice echoed, every word hammering the final nails into the coffin of a shattered family. The actions of the defendant, Eleanor, are of the utmost severity, resulting in the deprivation of 2 lives and the attempted murder of a third. The court entirely rejects the defense's assertion of temporary insanity. The forensic evidence and motives prove the defendant was entirely lucid, calculating, and fully aware of her actions. This court notes that the motive was rooted in archaic, toxic patriarchal obsession, extreme selfishness, and greed. The defendant believed she had the right to play God with human lives to satisfy her own desires. The psychological breakdown the defendant suffered upon learning the truth of the paternity does not absolve her of the cold-blooded, premeditated nature of the crime she committed. Therefore, the court sentences the defendant to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. The words "life in prison" rang out, sealing the fate of a woman who had spent her entire life calculating and scheming, only to lose absolutely everything. Eleanor showed no reaction. It seemed her soul had already died the moment she saw the DNA results. Only an empty husk remained to accept the judgment of the law. A month after the sentencing, I received a notice from the Illinois Department of Corrections, granting me my first visitation request. Before she was transferred to the maximum security state penitentiary, I debated whether to go, but ultimately, I went. Not to offer forgiveness, but to put a definitive end to this haunting chapter of my life. The visitation room smelled of bleach and cold concrete. Separating me and her was a thick slab of bulletproof glass and a black telephone receiver. When the guards brought Eleanor out, I barely recognized the woman sitting across from me. She had aged 20 years in a single month. Her white hair was buzzed short and patchy. Her cheeks were hollowed out, her eyes sunken like dark, bottomless pits harboring endless terror. She sat down, her trembling hand picking up the receiver. Her dead eyes stared at me for a long time before they managed to focus. Suddenly, she leaned forward, pressing her face against the glass. My grandson. Where is he? Are you hiding him from me?" Richard told me it was a boy. She still hadn't accepted the truth. Or perhaps her subconscious had built a massive defensive wall, rejecting the brutal reality and clinging to the last, desperate illusion to survive. I looked at her, feeling a complex mix of pity and bitter sorrow. This woman was truly despicable, but also incredibly pathetic. I picked up the phone. My voice was soft but absolute, stripped of all hatred, leaving only the calm detachment of an outsider. "Mom, there is no grandson. Wake up. Richard lied to you, and you murdered him for that lie." Hearing that, Eleanor recoiled, as if struck by lightning. She dropped the phone, grabbing her head with both hands, muttering endlessly. No, it's not true. My son, my baby." She curled into a ball on the cold metal chair. Her eyes returned to that blank, vacant stare, sinking back into her own private hell filled with the ghosts of her past. I hung up the phone, stood up, and took one last look at her. The domineering mother-in-law, who used to rule with an iron fist, was now just a broken, decaying shell in a prison uniform. Returning from the jail, the first thing I did was call my realtor to list the condo, the place that had been my home, and the graveyard of my marriage. Even though I bought the property with my own hard-earned money, every inch of the walls, every corner of the kitchen, was haunted by the shadows of the dead and the stench of betrayal. I accepted an offer slightly below market value just to close the deal quickly. I wanted to purge everything connected to that past from my life as fast as possible. Moving day, I only took my clothes and my pharmaceutical textbooks. Everything else, furniture, mementos, decor, I left behind or threw in the dumpster, shedding the dust of my past life. Holding the check from the house sale and the $150,000 I successfully clawed back from Chloe's family, I didn't feel rich or joyous. The money felt heavy. It was blood money, stained with tragedy, bought with lives, dignity, and the complete destruction of a family. I knew I couldn't spend this money on myself and ever feel peace. It needed to be cleansed through compassion to neutralize the horrific karma it carried. I divided the funds. A small portion I kept as seed money to start my new life. The vast majority I donated to charity. I reached out to a highly respected domestic violence nonprofit in Chicago that provides shelter and legal aid to women escaping abusive marriages, women who were trapped in hell, just like I was. As I signed the wire transfer authorization, watching those long strings of numbers disappear from my account, a massive weight lifted off my chest. I hoped this money would give someone the courage to escape a nightmare, to start over, or at the very least, provide a warm meal and a safe bed. I wasn't a saint. I was just a normal woman trying to find peace in my soul after surviving a Category 5 hurricane. Leaving the bank, I took a walk alone down a familiar street. The crisp autumn breeze blew golden leaves across the pavement. The city was still loud and bustling. People were still rushing around trying to make a living. It seemed my tragedy was just a tiny grain of sand in the vast desert of life. But for me, today was my rebirth. I filled my lungs with the free air, savoring the sweet taste of liberation. I pulled out my phone, deleted all my old contacts, deleted all the painful photos, keeping only one single image, a photo of me smiling brightly on the day I graduated from pharmacy school. That was the real me. That was Sarah, full of passion and youth. And I was going to find her again, starting today. I used the remaining funds to rent a small, secluded loft in a quiet, artsy neighborhood, surrounded by old oak trees that provided shade year-round. I didn't open a bakery or a coffee shop like many women looking for a fresh start. I decided to return to my deepest, most primal core, scent. In the past, Richard used to mock my hypersensitive nose, saying I smelled things like a bloodhound. He hated it when I complained about the faint smell of liquor, smoke, or unfamiliar perfume lingering on his shirts. But he didn't know that my God-given olfactory sense was exactly what saved my life, allowing me to detect the metallic scent of death in that fatal bowl of soup. I turned the small loft into an indie botanical perfumery and lab. I spent my days surrounded by essential oils, beakers, and microscales. I was no longer the clinical pharmacist buried in sterile, soulless Western medicine. I became an artisan, trying to tell the story of my life through the language of fragrance. I wanted to create scents not to seduce men, but to heal the wounded souls of women. Women who carried hidden pain, just like me. During the first few months, I locked myself in the lab for over 12 hours a day, mixing, inhaling, dumping batches out. The process of finding the perfect scent was as agonizing as the process of finding myself again. There were late nights when I would sit on the cold hardwood floor, surrounded by the heavy, intoxicating aromas of patchouli and sandalwood, and tears would suddenly stream down my face from the sheer loneliness. But in that absolute silence, I realized I was finally, truly living. I didn't have to read anyone's mood. I didn't have to fear someone slipping poison into my food. This loneliness wasn't terrifying. It was the price of freedom. It was the necessary silence. I needed to hear my own heartbeat clearer than ever before. I remembered the scent of the soup that night. The harsh, bitter smell of crushed antibiotics, the smell of betrayal, and the smell of death. I decided to use that sharp, bitter note as the inspiration for my debut collection. I wanted to turn pain into art, and horrific memories into strength. The day I launched my personal fragrance brand, I didn't host a massive gala at a 5-star hotel or hire tall models for PR. I simply hosted a small tea party in the garden outside my studio. The guests were close friends, women I had helped through the charity, and a few respected indie fragrance critics. I wore a simple ivory silk dress, my hair pulled up in an elegant twist. My makeup was light, but my face radiated a confident aura I had never possessed before. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, I stayed behind to clear the remaining wine glasses from the tables. Suddenly, a tall figure stepped into the light spilling from the studio window. I looked up and froze. It was Detective James, the lead investigator who had handled my case all those months ago. Today, he wasn't wearing his intimidating badge and uniform. He wore a simple, casual button-down shirt, holding a bouquet of pure white lilies, the flower of April, the month of new beginnings. He looked at me. His eyes no longer held the piercing scrutiny of a detective, but rather deep respect and a subtle, indescribable tenderness. "Congratulations, boss," he said, his deep voice carrying over the rustling autumn wind. "I bought a bottle of Awakening for my mother. She loved it. She said the scent carries the depth of a woman who has truly lived." I smiled, taking the bouquet from his hands. The soft fragrance of the lilies blended with the perfume lingering in the air, creating a surprisingly peaceful sensation. "Thank you, James. I thought you only knew the smell of case files and handcuffs," I joked, trying to hide the fact that my heart had skipped a beat. He smiled, his rugged, weathered face lighting up. "Your case was the one that kept me up the most in my career. I knew you weren't as innocent as your statement claimed. I knew you played their own game against them. But I chose to stay quiet, because the law requires evidence. But life, sometimes, requires the justice of a clear conscience. And you deserved your freedom." His confession left me speechless. He had understood everything from the very beginning. He had silently protected me by honoring the fragile boundaries of the law. We stood next to each other under the awning, looking out at the quiet street. Neither of us spoke another word about the tragic past. He asked me about my future plans, about the new sense I was formulating. I asked him about his new cases, about his daily life. There were no grand promises between us, but an invisible thread was woven from mutual understanding and profound respect. I don't know what tomorrow holds. Will I open my heart to this detective? Or will I continue my solitary, free journey? It didn't matter anymore, because for me, happiness was no longer defined by having a husband to rely on. Happiness was the ability to stand firmly on my own 2 feet, to wipe my own tears, and to create my own joy. I took a deep breath, taking in the scent of the night, the scent of tranquility and peace. I smiled, the lightest, most serene smile I had ever worn, then turned and walked up the steps, ready to welcome the first rays of the new day. In this life, whether we suffer or rejoice, whether we find misery or happiness, it ultimately rests in the palms of our own hands. If you found this story compelling and meaningful, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our latest episodes. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment with your thoughts below. Thank you for listening.